Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin the meeting. Good morning and welcome to the Committee of Adjustment meeting for Friday, January 17th. My name is Tom Hill and I will chair today's meeting. Before we begin, I would ask everyone if they would turn any mobile devices they have to the silent position so we're not interrupted. And I would also like to remind everybody that the proceedings today are being recorded and streamed live via the Township website. So with that in mind, if you would like to address the committee at some point and are asked to come forward, please use one of the microphones on the desk in front. There's a little button there that will turn it on and it will illuminate so that people who are listening to the recording will be able to hear. This morning we have 3 minor variance applications, and I'll briefly summarize the procedure to be used this morning. First, our Secretary Treasurer will advise the committee as to when, how, and to whom notice of each of the hearings was, each of the applications was circulated for the applications being considered. Next, each of the applications will be considered separately. Planning staff will advise as to the purpose and effect of the application and provide any information that is relevant. Our Secretary Treasurer will summarize any correspondence on file, and from there the applicant can make a brief presentation if they so choose. And the public will also have an opportunity to speak to the applications being considered. After the public forum, the committee will then deliberate on the proposed applications and consider a motion to pass, defeat, or defer the decision of the applications. The minor variance applications being considered this morning are A19-50 for 92 Trans-Canada Bay Road, A19-51 for 199 Pickerel Point Road, and A19-53 for 78 Stewart Lake Road. Before we begin, I would ask any members of the committee if they have any pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll move forward. I would ask the Secretary Treasurer then to advise us of any when these notices were circulated.
Notice of each of the applications was sent by first-class mail to the respective owners and assessed persons within 120 meters, 500 meters, or 800 meters, and to those persons and agencies likely to have an interest in the application. The notices were sent at least 20 days prior to this morning's meeting. Included in each notice was an explanation of the purpose and effect of the application and a key map showing the location of the property. Other relevant information may also have been provided. These circulations were provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act 1990.
Thank you. Our first application this morning is A19-50 for 92 Trans-Canada Bay Road. To the planner, please.
Good morning. So the first application in front of you today is A19-50, submitted by Gary Jarvis, relating to lands located at 92 Trans-Canada Bay Road, which is located in 6 Mile Lake. So the purpose of the application is to permit the development of a detached garage with a front yard setback of 13.5 meters, where 20 meters is permitted. So here we have an overview of this portion of the township. As you can see, the subject lands are located here in the southwest portion of 6 Mile Lake, just north of White's Falls Road. And then zooming in a little bit more, as you can see here, the property is located in black, just on and here we have an aerial of the subject lands. So as you can see here, the existing single detached dwelling, the existing sleeping cabin that's located along the water, and the proposed garage location is located in this area here. And just for some context, and we can come back to this slide later if you need, but the existing septic area is located here, and there's also a hydro line that goes through the property right above the septic area. So again, here's the survey of the proposed development. As you can see here, this is where the proposed garage is to be located. Septic area is located in here, and as you can see, that power line that goes through the property just over. So the proposed garage in size is approximately 47 square meters, which meets the maximum size requirements in the bylaw. And again, that setback of the garage here is that 13.5 meters, where typically a garage in this zone would require a 20-meter setback. Again, the purpose of the location of this garage really does come down to the existing septic and hydro lines, and that is why the applicant is requesting the variance. So the character of this area, is quite open, and most of the properties are relatively flat from the shoreline, which allows for a lot of the development to be relatively visual, and this property is quite in keeping with that as well. So here we have the elevation that was provided of the proposed garage. Now just some photos for you. So this is looking from the driveway into where the existing dwelling is, and as you can see here, some storage that hopefully will be able to be stored in the garage once it is developed. So here's the existing sleeping cabin and the approximate location of where the garage would be located, which is in behind where that sleeping area is. So here's a shot of the existing dwelling on the property. And then looking from the water's edge towards the approximate location between the two large trees where the proposed garage is to be located. And then looking from the main dock area, again back towards the garage location. And again, as you can see, the existing development is already visual from the water. And then this is looking towards the adjacent lands to the south, so the neighboring property to where the garage would be located. As you can see, it's quite heavily vegetated. So it is reasonable for a residential lot to have an accessory building to store motor vehicles and subsequent household items. The proposed location of the garage requires a reduction in the front yard setback requirement. It is not feasible to comply with the minimum front yard setback requirement given the existing septic and hydro line locations, which would have to be relocated at a very significant cost. The proposed garage location is not anticipated to have a negative impact on water quality, as it is located behind an existing large structure, and no vegetation removal of mature trees is expected that would compromise any further integrity of the shoreline. The proposed development would be similar in visual impact to what currently exists, and the opportunity to apply site plan control on the property will enable the township to see if there is any opportunities for any additional vegetation to be planted in the front location. So staff do believe that the application meets the 4 tests of the Minor Variance for a Planning Act and recommend approval. The applicant is here if you have any questions for himself or me.
Thank you, Victoria. I expect you're the applicant. Could you please identify yourself with your name and address, please?
My name is Gary Jarvis. I live at 92 Trans-Canada Bay Road.
Is there anything that you'd like to add to the planner's comments?
No, just her thanks. She, made things so much easier and, cut through all the stuff so it's presentable to you guys. And everybody who came out was very understanding. The neighbors were understanding. I got so many people who were thanking this process. It's just the existing structure, temporary structures under the hydro lines, and although the hydro said they didn't mind it, they said that the planning department would, and that seems to be the only place. I have talked to all the neighbors who will visually see it, both across the bay and even the island across, and they all seem to be okay with it. The siding is going to be similar to the cottage and the bunkie, and it's that one tree that you said may have to come down, that tree on the right. I talked to the contractor. That tree on the left is an oak that's dying. That one, yeah. You can see, if you look halfway up, you can see it's on its last legs. That tree may have to come out if I'm gonna, be totally frank. And he said, it might, interfere with the concrete pad I'm putting down. So that's the only difference in what you presented than what I hope to do.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer, did we have any correspondence on this application?
9 letters of support were received from Harold Tovian, Graham Chalmers and Millie Cumming, Dean Posey, Alex Kim, Jim Parrington, Robert Smith, Peter Stewart, Mike Lamza, and Kathy House.
Are there any members of the public that wish to address this application? Okay, seeing none, I will bring the application before the committee for any comments, and we'll begin with Member Cooper. Thank you. Member Demke?
I'm fine. I had a pleasure to meet the owner, and there's really no other place you could put that. And I think that tree is kind of dying, wasn't it?
It's
Anyway,
pretty well
yeah.
gone. I think I would
Anyway.
probably take it down anyhow, even
No
without the
problem at
garage.
all. I'm okay with this.
Member Matthews?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Victoria, the cottage, how far, what's the setback from the lot line, or the front yard setback on the cottage, out of curiosity? 'Cause it looks like it's kind of about the same distance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the setback, it doesn't have the specific dimension on the survey, but this
It's got
dimension
some
here
numbers there.
to the
yeah.
front of the deck is 12.6, so it's probably another 2 or 3 meters. Just as a note, this cottage was a rebuild of the previous cottage that was there, and that's why it was permitted to be built in application.
Okay, and just one further question, because we have talked quite a bit about site visits and stuff. I see that you had the opportunity of being out in October, and yet we didn't, and I wonder if there's a reason for that, because it's a lot easier to see it when there's not snow on the ground, right, to get a sense for where the garage would be going.
So through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I myself met with the applicant probably mid of last year, and we anticipated that it may be coming in the new year, so I had the ability to go out when I did, which was obviously lucky for me. I'm not sure what the site is like. I think there were a few other members that went recently, and I don't know what the snow cover's like that you were able to experience.
Yeah. I mean, your pictures are good. It just,
Yeah.
from the same, if we could have seen it in October, it would have maybe made it a little easier than it already is. Thank you for that.
Member Ferguson?
Just a quick question. Can you go back to some of the pictures, please, Victoria? Yeah, that's a good one. I did do a site inspection, and I did notice that that oak tree is not in good shape. You'd be well advised to get rid of it. Secondly, if I stand up where the existing temporary shelter is, and I look down to the sleeping cabin, there is a fair slope. So my question is simply, is there a lot of remediation that would be required here to be able to put your pad in?
There's a stream that runs through there in the spring, the runoff from the snow. I've got a culvert underneath the driveway, and I would have to put a culvert underneath the concrete pad. The contractor said that he might be able to put some large rocks in there. It's just the spring that comes down, and depending on how much snow it is, is how aggressive that stream is. I would probably lean, I don't want to build this thing and then have it, float down into 6 Mile Lake. So I would lean heavily on a culvert that, the culvert under the road has been perfect. It's been fine. The beavers tried to block it, but, no, that's the, and that was a concern of mine, to make sure that
Yeah.
pad is solid and a culvert underneath it, worst case scenario. It'll outlive me, that's for sure, but, it's a valid point.
Okay, so
0.8 meters, I think, so, no, it's not significant. It does slope down to where the stream goes through, but, The contractor said maybe 2, maybe 3 loads of gravel.
That's
Bring
great.
up-
You've alleviated any concerns I
Yep.
have, and I see from where it was marked out that it appears you're going to try and save the big pine here.
Oh, yeah, I like the big pine.
That's a beautiful tree. So, nice job. I have no objection.
Thank you. Member Bojack.
I have no concerns, and thanks to the planning department, it was very complete and concise, so I'm fine.
Member Cano.
No, no concerns. I see you got plenty of support from your neighbors, which is nice, and I support it.
Thank you. I visited the site as well, and I will commend you on the fact that the markers that were there showing the 4 corners of the garage were very visible. That makes it very easy for us when we go, even though there is snow cover there. There are those driveway markers with the reflectors on the top, so it was easy to see what's there, and I have no objection on that as well. Okay, if there are no further questions or comments, I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19-50 for 92 Trans-Canada Bay Road to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit a maximum front yard setback of 13.5 meters, where 20 meters is required, to facilitate the development of a detached garage, subject to the following. A, that the approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use intended in the application. B, that a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and required additional plantings in the front of the yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. And C, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? The motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you again.
We don't want to do that. Okay. Our next application is A19-51 for 199 Pickerel Point Road. To the planner, please.
So the next application in front of you is A19-51, which was submitted by Adam and Aaron Hancock for lands located at 199 Pickerel Point Road. So the purpose of this application is to permit the development of an in-water boathouse, which requires a maximum lot coverage increase to 11.9%, where 10% is currently permitted. So here we have an overview map of this area of the township again. As you can see, it's just south of Whites Falls Road, located on the Severn River Gloucester Pool area. So the lands are currently designated waterfront in the official plan and zoned SR1, Shoreline Residential Type 1. So here we're zooming in more on the Pickerel Point area. As you can see, the lot is outlined here in black. And then here we have an aerial of the subject lands. As you can see, single detached dwelling, docking area, and the proposed boathouse location is around here. And as you can see in the surrounding lands, there are some other boathouses that do exist. So here we have the survey that was provided for the application. As you can see here, the existing dwelling and attached garage that has now been built on site. I believe it was built in 2018 by the applicant, and the proposed boathouse location here at the top of the property. Here's just some photos of the site. This is looking out towards the point of the property from the west side of the existing dwelling. the approximate area of the boathouse location, and of course, no vegetation is required to be removed here to install the boathouse. So this is looking from the west side of the dwelling across the small bay area to the adjacent neighboring lands. And here we're looking to the east of the subject lands. As you can see here, there is an existing boathouse on the neighboring property as well. Then again, just looking out a bit further off the point, as you can see, the existing character of this area, there is quite a number of boathouses that do exist. And so the intent of that maximum lot coverage provision in the zoning bylaw is to ensure that the appropriate relationship exists between lot area and buildings and structures on subject lands. The permitted maximum lot coverage within the SR1 zone is 10%, and that is because it's located along the Trent Severn waterway. So the proposed boathouse would require a permitted maximum lot coverage of 11.9%, and that is why the application is in front of you today. This does equate to an increase of 19% of what is currently permitted. So the existing development on the subject lands is located behind the required 20-meter setback, and as you could see through the photos, there is quite a few mature trees that do help buffer the existing development from the lands. The proposed boathouse is not anticipated, again, to require any vegetation removal, and the overall balance of built form and the naturalized area of the property, in staff's opinion, would not be impacted by the proposed boathouse, given its layout. So staff do believe that the application does meet the 4 tests under the Planning Act, and the applicant is here for himself or me, and we do recommend approval.
Thank you, Victoria. I take you to the applicant. Would you please identify yourself with your name and address?
Yeah, I'm Adam Hancock, 199 Pickerel Point Road.
Thank you very much. Do you have anything to add to the planner's comments?
No, I would just like to thank the township and everybody involved to this point for their cooperation, and the people that came to the site were very courteous. My wife was there during each visit to escort people and identify the areas, or the area where the boathouse was being built.
Okay, thank you. There may be some questions, so if you want to remain there. Has there been any correspondence on this application?
No correspondence was received.
Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this application? Yes, sir. Would you please step forward and identify yourself with your name and address?
Barry Earhart, 211 Pickerel Point Road, the direct property next to the Hancocks. Pretty well the only property, I think, in the area that would really be affected by a boathouse being put here. Even with sight lines, only really when you get down to our waterfront you would see it. We have no problems with it. Great neighbors, would love to see them get this approved and be able to build their boathouse.
Is it your property that's shown in the picture that has the existing boathouse on it?
It is family property, yes.
So if I'm walking up their laneway, your cottage would be to the right.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions from the public, I will close the public section of the meeting and bring the application before the committee for any questions or comments, beginning with Member Caddo.
Yeah, just the one question. Is it just like a one-story, a 2-story boathouse? There's no plans for it, so is it?
It's a 1-story boathouse. It's within the limits of the bylaws, and I've already submitted and have in hand my permit from the Trent Severn people, okay. So it's built to their standards.
Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you. Member Bocek?
No, I have no concerns with the application.
Member Ferguson?
While a 19% increase in total lot coverage is significant, I'm in favor in this case. I think the location is great. I think you've got nice tree cover. You've done an excellent job designing your existing cottage, and I think this will only add to it, so I have no objection whatsoever.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Matthews?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just have one question, and it's prefaced because our cottage is on Georgian Bay, and any boathouses that are permanent, which I assume this one
yes.
is, would never stand the test of time with the water levels. So I'm taking the assumption that your water levels are pretty constant and
Yes.
and steady?
Yeah, they're regulated, it's part of the Trent system.
Okay, I thought so, I just needed that confirmation, thank you.
Member Debque.
No problems at all. It looks like it's following all the proper, I guess, essence of what the guidelines should be, so no problem at all.
Member Cooper.
Just clarification, this is sort of maybe a dumb
A
question.
roof, and that does include any in-water or on-land boathouses. So it is within the definition of lot coverage that's why the boathouse is included.
So if this was a floating boathouse, would it still count?
That is correct, yes.
But if it was 10 docks, it wouldn't count?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions along the same line in that when I spoke to your wife when we were there, it appears that this boathouse is going to be built on piers.
That's correct.
And I guess I would say that in order to do that, you would have had to get approval from Parks Canada or the Trans Severn people.
Which I have.
Which I would think piers would affect the fish habitat. Or was there any concern about the fish habitat in that area? And
To you, Mr. Chair, there is no identified fish habitat area along this property shoreline nor in the close proximity. So from the township's perspective, there is no fish habitat. The applicant, as he spoke to, he does have the approval from the Trent already. And when it comes to the construction of the piers and what have you, the building department would review that upon the building permit process.
okay.
The boathouse will be built with 3-inch steel pipes that will be drilled into the rock. The location was selected because it's all rock in that area, so there's no weeds or anything where the fish want to feed off of, anything like that in that area.
And of course, if you're building on rock and the water level is controlled, you're not going to have an issue with
No.
flooding like if you were on Georgian Bay or some of the other areas. One other question again for planning, and it came up in the last application, and we've been asked this before. The existing dwelling that's there, which is affecting lot coverage, is what we're talking about here, is a replacement from a dwelling that was there prior. And it seems in a lot of cases when a new dwelling is erected, the footprint is larger. Are there some restrictions in the zoning bylaw that allow, that control the amount of expansion of a previous dwelling?
To you, Mr. Chair, so you are correct. There are provisions in the bylaw that allow for controlled expansion of existing dwellings that are located within the required front yard of the property. This applicant, as you can see here, the previous dwelling to the new dwelling, the way that they built the new structure complied with all requirements of the zoning bylaw. So they brought everything back to meet the 20 meters, the side yard setback. I believe they were at 9.98% of lot coverage. So they met all the requirements, and that's why they were able to build a larger structure, because they didn't feed off of just the existing dwelling and expand. They did a full rebuild of the property to meet the zoning bylaw requirements.
Okay, and just to clarify that point, so if in fact the approval is received for that boathouse, you have the existing footprint of the new dwelling that's there. And is there not a provision that would allow the property owner to expand that dwelling later on?
I see, sorry. So because the existing dwelling is already at pretty much that 10%, and today they're asking for approval to 11.9%, any expansion to any structure on the property, or for instance, if they want to build a shed later on, any of that would have to come back to the committee for approval. Essentially, this would be them maxing out the buildable opportunity on the lot. So any changes to the lot at all will have to come back to either committee or council for approval in the future, which I don't think that they intend to do, but they would not be able to expand this dwelling without it coming for approval.
Now, that clarifies the question I was asking. It seems in some cases that, you know, you can add, say, 10 or 15% to your property and then wait a couple of years and add another 10%. But I guess the controlling factor there is total lot coverage.
Exactly, yeah.
You got to come to for a minor variance after that point. All right, that answers my questions. Are there any other? Yes, Member Cooper.
Just building on your questions, so the reason that, I think there's a 25% rule or something like that, whereby if you're, I guess, in the front yard setback, you're only allowed a 25% expansion, but in this particular case, it may have been greater than that, but I think what you said is because it's set back, it didn't fall under that umbrella?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. So there is a sliding scale, so it depends on how far back the legal non-complying structure is, but again, in this case, that wasn't a factor. They built the cottage back, they met the 20-meter setback, so they were able to go up to the regular requirements. There was no percentage maximum that they had to comply.
But just for our education, so if this was 15 meters back, you would have had a limitation.
That is correct. There is.
And it would have been the sliding scale you said, but I think it can't, it's up to 25% or something like that, isn't it?
So it depends on where it's located. So for instance, if it's 15 meters or more, it's 70%. If it's between 25% and, if it's between 10 meters and 15 meters, it's 40%. And if it's anything below 10 meters, it's 25% that you quoted.
Okay, thank you.
You're Mr. Chair, but you'd still need to meet the lot coverage requirements.
Yeah,
That policy or that provision doesn't trump lot area, so to speak. So that's the situation here, is that they can never expand this without any planning approvals because the lot area coverage is effectively the trump card that says this is what you've got.
Yeah, thank you. That was something that has been, we've been questioning going forward. So I think it's clear now that the top determining factor then is lot coverage, and we're certainly address that in this application. So if there are no other questions, there is a question from Member Ferguson.
Just a quick comment. I'd like to thank your wife for coming out and meeting with us and showing us exactly where the boathouse was going to go. There was no guesswork involved, and she was very helpful.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves a minor variance application for A19-51 for 199 Pickerel Point Road to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit a total lot coverage of 11.9%, where 10% is permitted, to facilitate the development of an in-water boathouse, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. And B, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of the decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next application is for A19-53 for 78 Stewart Lake Road. To the planner, please.
So our final variance application that you have in front of you today is for Al and Anita White. And the request is to permit an addition to an existing 82 square meter cottage, or 884 square feet, and the construction of a detached garage that is 90 square meters. The following variances are requested. So an increase in the maximum permitted gross floor area of the cottage by 109 square meters, where an increase of 33 square meters is permitted. So they are expanding based on the legal non-complying section that Victoria actually was just speaking about. So as of right, they are permitted to expand by 40%, which is at 33 square meters, and they're proposing 133%. They're also proposing an increase in the dwelling width to be expanded by 6.1 meters, where 6 meters is permitted, and a front yard setback of 12.3 meters, where a setback of 13.2 meters exists, and to permit a lot coverage of 7.5%, where 7% is permitted, and to permit a height of 4.7 meters for the detached garage, where 4.5 meters is permitted. Just to give you an idea of where the subject property is located, it is on Stewart Lake, and it is shown here on the screen in black. It is the second property in on the right-hand side here. You would come down Stewart Lake and then wrap around. And just to give you an idea of the aerial imagery of the current development on the property. So you can see the existing cottage here, and then they have a couple docks located along the shoreline. On the screen is their proposed development. So as you can see, there is the existing cottage here, and the existing closest setback is 13.2 meters, and they're proposing an addition here, and the setback will be 12.3 meters. So there is a little jut in along the shoreline that's causing the dwelling to be located a little bit closer than what currently exists. So they're proposing to raise the existing cottage in order to add a full basement. And with doing that, they needed to put an addition so that they can access that basement. So the new staircase will be in the addition so that they can get into the basement. The existing height of the cottage they'll be increasing it about 4 feet, and the existing height of the cottage is 4.2 meters, and it will go to 5.3 meters. They're able to increase the height by 1.2 meters to a maximum of 6 meters, so they are within their height increase expansion rates. And they are proposing the detached garage located towards the rear. So there is an existing tarp shelter, which I will show you some photos of, and they're proposing to remove that tarp shelter and build the garage within that existing footprint. And with building the garage, they're proposing to remove this shed, which has a storage lean-to on it, and the existing deck will be reconstructed as well. There was a fish habitat impact assessment completed with the application, because along the shoreline and towards, I'll just go back to the map, within this area is a type 1 critical fish habitat. So a supportive fish habitat impact assessment was completed, stating that no negative impacts to the fish habitat will occur with the proposed development. And they did give a few mitigation measures, and I'll just go through a couple, such as during construction to install sediment fencing and a revegetation of the shoreline area. So they had identified shoreline replanting within this area here, which is in front of that proposed addition. Just to give you an idea of what the existing property looks like, so this is that tarp shelter that they're proposing to remove and rebuild the garage in this location. So this is standing at the corner of that existing tarp shelter looking towards the neighboring property. So as you can see, there is vegetation buffering the view of the garage to the neighbors. And standing right beside the garage looking towards the neighbors, and you can see the neighboring cottage, their accessory building. Again, this is the area where that proposed detached garage is going. And looking towards the rear. So as you can see towards the road, it is densely vegetated. So this is the existing cottage, and to the right is where they're proposing the addition. And again, just where that addition will be going. So as you can see, there is mature vegetation. And this is that shed storage lean-to building, and that's just located to the left of the existing cottage. So this is looking southeast. This is the shed and lean-to that will be removed. And a view looking from the deck towards the shoreline. And again, looking to the south towards that shoreline. And looking out into Stewart Lake. This is looking directly across to the cottage that is directly across from the proposed, from the subject location. This is where that type 1 fish habitat is located. This is the existing cottage, and the addition will be proposed on the left there. And again, that proposed addition location. As you can see, it's relatively clear as is. And this is looking towards the neighboring property. So as you can see, there's mature vegetation buffering the subject location to the adjacent landowner. This is standing near the water's edge, not entirely there, but looking towards that proposed addition. And this is the area that the environmentalist has identified to put some replanting. And another view, standing closer towards the water's edge, looking towards that addition location. This is looking towards the neighboring property and their front yard that is well vegetated. Just to give you an idea of what the proposal will look like, so this is looking at the existing cottage, and this is the addition located towards the left. So they will be increasing it in height, but they will be staying within their height limits. And then the side, so it's just a partial addition, it's not the full, and the upstairs. So the addition is to add this staircase in order to access the basement. And just to give you an idea of the proposed garage, so they are proposing a height of 4.7 meters as opposed to 4.5, and that is to allow for a taller door to be able to put their boat in on the boat trailer and to have enough room so that they don't damage the boat when trying to do that. And it shows you the existing grade. So the intent of the maximum permitted gross floor area is to create a relationship between usable space and on a lot and the lot size. The existing cottage is legal non-complying, and the bylaw permits some as-of-right expansions. The intent of limiting the gross floor area for non-complying dwellings is to avoid overly large cottages in close proximity to the water. So this is to reduce the amount of visual impact and maintain the natural integrity of the waterfront community. So the intent of that front yard setback provision is to ensure structures are adequately set back from the shoreline and to ensure the character of the area is maintained and to provide an area of vegetation between the dwelling and the shoreline. So as you can see in the photos, there was mature vegetation that was buffering, and additional plantings will be done as per the mitigation measures outlined in the Fish Habitat Impact Assessment. And the intent of the maximum dwelling width is to limit visual impact and built form of non-complying dwellings from the water in order to ensure the aesthetic quality and the natural heritage of the waterfront community is protected. And the intent of the maximum permitted height provision is to limit scale and visual impact of structures and to ensure the aesthetic quality of the waterfront community is maintained. So the proposed attached garage is set back behind the proposed addition and the existing cottage, and it is lower than the existing tree canopy, so it won't be visual from the shoreline. And the intent of the maximum permitted lot coverage is to maintain a balance between built and natural form. So the application meets the intent of the zoning bylaw and the 4 tests within the Planning Act. Site plan control is a condition of approval, and that is to implement all of the mitigation measures that the environmentalist has noted in the report. And another condition that you will notice is that before the owner can receive final inspection on the detached garage is to ensure that that lean-to and shed is removed. That is to allow them to use it for storage while they are constructing the detached garage, but before they can close that permit, that will have to come down, which is the intent of the owner anyway. So I'm available if you have any questions for me or.
Thank you, Dana. Has there been any correspondence on this application?
No correspondence was received.
Is the applicant here, and would you wish to address the committee and add any comments in addition to what the planner has provided? Okay, thank you very much. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on this application? Okay, seeing none, I will bring the close the public forum and bring the application before the committee for questions or comments, beginning with Member Ferguson.
I have no objection. I have one just quick question. Often, raising a cottage to put a basement under it is generally quite expensive. Have you thought about the fact of just taking down the existing cottage and starting from square one?
If it was an old cottage, I would have built into.
Would you mind coming forward, please, just so we can record your comments on the meeting minutes? Thanks. And if you'd give us your name and address, please.
My name's Alan White. My address is 78 Stewart Lake Road. That's the cottage address.
Okay, thank you very
And
much.
To answer that question, is the cottage is relatively new. It was built in 2000, so it's in good condition. It's a prefab. It's very easy lift compared to an old structure.
Thank you very much. That was more just for my curiosity than. I like the fact that the majority of the expansion that's going on here is going to be below ground. And so we don't have a lot of urban sprawl on the lot other than the small addition you're putting on to give you access to the basement.
Correct.
And I think that there are restricted opportunities as to where you can put the garage after site inspecting the property yesterday. So I think you've chosen a good location. I have no objection.
Thank you. Member Bochek.
I have no objections. It looks like the plans were well thought out, and it really doesn't affect the view from the canoe or from the road. Thank you.
Member Caddo.
No, no objections. I agree with it. The only one thing, you see there's a bathroom in the basement, so septic is fine with that, I guess, with the new addition of the bathroom, or is it approved, or?
I believe the septic was installed in 2000. Owner can speak to whether or not the addition would.
As far as the actual capacity of the...
Yeah, that's
is that
kind of
you're
what,
talking
yeah,
about?
just,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it was built for 6 people, the size of that, and it'll basically my wife and myself.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
That'll just be, like, say, if you have visiting.
Thank you. Member Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, you know, sort of on first blush, when you see 4 or 5 different variances, and you think, whoa, wait a minute, can this slow down a little bit? But they are all very minor, and I would agree with Member Ferguson's comments that it's really just raising it up a bit. The view from the canoe, as we say, is not really going to be affected, so I really don't have an issue with this application.
Thank you. Member Demke.
Thank you. No real problems. The way it's worded, when I first looked at it, the very first one, an increased maximum permitted gross floor of the cottage, it looks like 300% the way it kind of, so I was wondering, okay, what does that really mean? Does that include the new garage, or even though it says cottage?
Through you, Chair. So it's an increase by 133%. So they're increasing square footage wise, or square meters, by 109 square meters. So that's including the entirety of the basement and the new addition, not including the garage.
Okay. It just seemed like a lot to me, and
I think it's just because of the
Yeah.
footprint.
It's the basement that causes the
Yeah, because they're
question.
essentially doubling their existing.
Without changing the footprint, we're just lifting up and doubling right
Yeah.
off the bat.
Yeah, it was only a question for me to understand, because I really didn't when I first looked at that, but everything else had been at the property. It's a nice big property, and I guess a few trees probably will have to go around where the tented area is.
Yeah, the front area, you suggested some vegetation in there, which will be fine.
Yeah. Okay, I know I have no problem with it.
Member Cooper.
I'm talking about the application. I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm just being very succinct today.
Yes, I appreciate that very much.
I'm sure you do. Won't be very often.
It's a new year.
He's trying to not be succinct now. Thank you very much. I had just a question again, similar to before, in terms of the gross floor area. And when we're talking about gross floor area here, we're talking about habitable space, so that that excludes the footprint of the garage being included in that. If in fact there was some dwelling space in that garage, would that be included in gross floor area for that property?
No, it would not. So gross floor area only counts towards within the dwelling walls. So if they had a sleeping cabin in the detached garage, then there's a maximum size requirement for a sleeping cabin, but it's separate from gross floor area of a dwelling.
Okay, that's great. And is it required to put any restriction on the use of that building, the new garage? Or is it, if it's designated as a garage, that's what it is?
Chair, if it's designated as a garage, they can only use it as a detached garage. If they wanted to put a sleeping cabin in it, then they would have to meet the requirements of the bylaw in order to do that. But they're just proposing to use it one story, no loft or anything, just storage for their boat in the winter.
Okay, thank you very much, Dana. If there are no further questions or comments, I'll read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19-53 for 78 Stewart Lake Road to zoning bylaw 2014-75 to permit an increase in the maximum permitted gross floor area by 109 square meters, a minimum front yard setback of 12.3 meters, an increase in dwelling width by 6.1 meters, a maximum lot coverage of 7.5%, a maximum detached garage height of 4.7 meters, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. B, that a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and areas of new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. C, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. D, that approval of this variance expires 3 years. That's the same thing again. Still doesn't. And E, that the shed and storage lean-to be removed prior to final inspection of the detached garage. All those in favor? The motion is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. White.
Thank you.
Okay. Couple more items on the agenda is that we have circulated the minutes of the November 15th, 2019 meeting. Do you want to do the agenda one too? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. We also have a resolution here that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment adopts the agenda for today's meeting, which is January 17th, 2020. I beg your pardon? I haven't seen any objections so far. So, all those in favor of approving the agenda for today's meeting?
No. Let's vote it down. No.
Okay. All right. All those in favor, please signify. Okay, the motion is approved. See what I have to do? And finally, we have a motion to adjourn today's meeting at 10:52 until. Just that was a test, and
You're still out east, right?
you did well. You did well. Nice work, Member Matthews. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment does now adjourn at 9:52 until February the 14th at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Okay. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. Oh, I can't hit it too far away.
Is there, last year we got a list of the dates for all the whole year. Were you able to get that? Helps for planning.
I would have to address that question to our Secretary Treasurer.
Yeah, I can send out the dates. I don't have a list made up. Do we have a list? No. So I could just send an email with all the dates
Yeah, an
listed.
email
Yeah.
would be fine. It's just that it helps for planning.
Yep.
Yeah.
For the rest of the year.
Now that the meeting is officially over, I have one other question for the planning staff. I have a question for the planning staff. I can't reach the block. Just a question that came up once before. When we talk about setbacks and the intent of the official plan is to maintain the visual appearance from the lake, if in fact most of the properties are, say, 15 meters back from the water, and an applicant comes forward with a new lot and applies for construction of a new dwelling that is 15, is that considered a matter that would require a minor variance? And the reason being, if all the other neighbors are 15 and he's applying for 15?
Yep, so the bylaw does require 20 meters, so if it didn't meet the bylaw requirement, there are some zoning bylaws in some municipalities that do establish what's terminology is an established building line is what they call it, and our bylaw doesn't have that. So some bylaws say, for example, if the setback requirement's 5 meters from the street for a dwelling, but if the established building line's 3 meters already on that road, then an infill situation could go at 3 meters, but that's not how our bylaw is constructed, so.
Okay, and one other question, Jamie, if I may, is this, the term "as of right." As of right means that you are entitled to expand or develop your property within certain guidelines. But if I take the meaning from what you had said earlier this morning, that as long as you stay within, let's say, lot coverage or height restriction or whatever, as of right is acceptable, but you're not as of right allowed to exceed any of the terms of the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, as of right is really just a term for in accordance with the requirements of the bylaw, so in compliance with the bylaw. So basically, when we refer to as of right, we're saying what's the building envelope on the property, or so is development meeting those setback requirements? Is it meeting the lot coverage requirements? All those things. Is it meeting the height requirements? Is it meeting the number of buildings required? Those are what we refer to as of right. That makes sense, yeah?
It does. It's not exactly what I thought that meant, but that does make sense. You don't have a right in terms of you have some legal precedence that allows you to do whatever you want. It just says that you're allowed to do whatever within the terms of the zoning bylaw.
Basically, what you can do without applying for planning act
Why would they?
approval.
So we know where to follow. We just follow Mr. Cooper. Mr. Hill, you're familiar with speaking.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So I'm reading the minutes, and the committee members stated no objections were made from the board of cottage association. Have you ever heard of
We're in three.
That's Ryan Bocheck's ward, and then.
That's 6 Mile, which is Steep Rock Road. Would be the 6 Mile Lake Cottage Association or the rate there. And both. There are two associations.
To include both.
We should have said Mr. Bocheck's board.
Bojack land.
I just sort of skimmed through it. It's funny how something.
Jessica,
Yeah.
congratulations on your new job.
Thank you very much.
Oh, is it official?
It is official.
It is official.
Now we really have to bow
Now
to
you really
you?
have to
Oh,
bow,
no.
and you know what, I
Congratulations.
Oh, look at still have one. I'm gonna stay on this side of the desk, I can tell you.
Congrats. Thank you very much.
They must have had a lot.
I guess you're buying lunch today then, just.
To take that job, because I see you even.
I know, yeah, this is nothing, it's not because I was in people for a week, this is nothing but stress.
Where are you from?
Largo.
Wow, no,
It's nicer, it's on the southern part of the island, and it's like its own little island, there's only a few resorts there, so it's not like in Marinero or something.
but they're
I
going,
used to be a part of it though, but it's not so
seems
much.
to me to be 3 times over.
So it's based on their existing, do you remember any of their existing dwellings?
No, it wasn't, he was working, still.
Yeah, I would not remember a lot of it if I was there for 2 years. You could probably tell me I was there for 2 years a few weeks ago, and I'd be like, yeah, that's total.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Peter,
Yeah.
I thought, if you're heading to, Honey Harbor from here,
It's Mason Bay.
but, yes.
First road before
Yeah.
Mason Bay Road.
Yeah, he gave us back to me,
Yeah.
he said it was Peckerel Point, it just, when I read it
Something
this morning,
trail or,
it seems like, okay.
Hunter Trail.
109 allowed.
Lane, there we go. It's just the, south side of Mason Bay versus the
So
north side.
just because they're raising it allows a little space.
yeah.
First road we come to versus the second.
Yeah, and it's well marked. You won't, there's only 4 places there. Mine is one for all the cars and no parking.
Oh, that was.
Yeah, so if you're the last one there.
Is Linda ready for lunch at 10:50?
I told her that.
Okay, so, you're number 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is the,
It's, the last.
What are-
There are 4 places.
Because I've never
And
really.
we are the second, place on the right.
second on the right.
And it's green, got a lot of cars,
A lot of cars.
and it's very sweater.
Just push the car out of the way, right?
The guy should have raised the roof from, that top stone, how well it passed my, point you over there. It's facing right into the roof.
And your neighbor just bought his shore.
I'm just drawing.
Council. You did? Imagine that.
It's not that big, but people get home.
So what's happening in my area?
This new Bell Live is really
The,
good, especially one right now.
I'm going there now, and I think it's way.
Yeah, I have to get,
What they
Bill's
call
gonna
it,
come
good
down for
package.
11, so I'm gonna probably drive out.
You get 2 months of free movie channels, and you just like